Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Building the Black Educator Pipeline. I am your host, Shana Terrell, educator activist hailing from the South Bronx that raised me, and of course, trucking around in these Philadelphia streets that made me. I would like to thank all our co-conspirators who come back every week to support our efforts and watch the show. And shout out to all our new folks here and our new viewers coming to this space and joining this community. And as always, I got to give a shout out to Citizens Ed and the Center for Black Educator Development for creating this platform for us to talk to real people in the real struggle, doing real things. Our theme for today is going to be reimagining a liberatory education. And what I really want to talk about and explore is this pandemic our chance to transform education for our children? And what is the role of Black educators in reimagining liberatory schools post-pandemic? As always, if you like what you hear, please comment, please like, please share. You can start off by sharing your opinion with us in the comments. And is your opinion that the pandemic is our chance to transform education for our children? So you can start off by answering that question. As always, it's the last Thursday of the month, and I am so excited because our resident Baba, Dr. Carr, is back to drop some knowledge for us. Of course, I'm going to read his bio because there may be new people here who don't know my guy and need to know about the great things he's doing out in this world.
Little.
Dr. Carr is an expert on the legacy of Black education and the co-founder of Philadelphia Freedom Schools movement. Dr. Carr currently serves as the Associate Professor of Afro-American Studies, an adjunct professor at Howard Law, and a Department Chair of African Studies at Howard University. Dr. Carr led the creation of the African American History curriculum now required by all Philadelphia youth within the public school system. He also serves as the City of Philadelphia's first resident scholar of race and culture in 1999. Dr. Carr has dedicated his career to the Black history and education through scholarly work, lecturing around the world, and media features, which includes BBC, NPR, CNN. He's also co-host of his own YouTube series, In Class with Carr. Please catch Dr. Carr at 12 noon on Saturdays for In Class with Carr. Dr. Carr, welcome.
Hello, my dear sister Shana, and congratulations. The momentum continues to build on building the Black Educator Pipeline, and it's always a blessing to be with you once a month. The ancestors always line things up. I'm so glad to see you, sis.
I'm always so glad to see you and have you. The knowledge that you drop, the teachings that you give, like, so dope. We need this kind of information to build the Black Educator Pipeline. So, Baba, as always, I appreciate you.
I say. And tell folks, hey, y'all, if y'all watching, go grab some folks and bring them into the conversation and get in the comments. Y'all raise some questions with us. This is a conversation. This one I think is going to, well, each one is special, but this one I think it takes a certain different type of urgency. So this is the conversation we're always having. So,
yes.
But this time you raised the direct question. You said, let's just get to the point.
right to it, right?
Right to it.
Yes. So we're here today to talk about reimagining a liberatory education. And I really think that the post-pandemic or being in the pandemic gives folks a really good opportunity to do that. I think the pandemic forced us to think about that because I think it forced us to think about education in a completely different way.
Yes.
I think folks were really wrestling with this idea that education means you have to be inside of a building, right? And you have to teach a certain way, right? When we talk about traditional education, I think the pandemic brought all of that to a halt. It also made us really explore the ways in which children learn differently and children thrive in different settings. And it forced people to be creative, to be innovative. All kinds of things happen because of this pandemic. But I do see it as an opportunity for folks to really reimagine schools in a liberatory way. I do.
I agree. I agree 100%. I mean, first of all, the old world is gone. Let's just establish that. That world is gone now. It's not coming back. All of the structural inequalities, all of the deep structural inequities in this in the world were revealed by this pandemic. We know in our experience as humans on this ball we call the Earth, that is called the Earth, that there are moments in time and space which accelerate trends, and not just in human society. You can have natural disaster, you can have human-made disaster, you can have, whether it's a virus, and we understand that what we're experiencing now with this coronavirus, and coronavirus isn't new. It's a direct result of human beings pushing nature back, and nature pushed back. And so we've been here before as a species. Now, what it reveals is the nature of the societies we live in, and how well or not well we are prepared to continue to exist on this ball. Imagine if we didn't have trained scientists who were erasing the clock to try to blunt the force of this human beings pushing into nature and nature pushing back. All of us would still be indoors having this conversation. But because we were all forced out of our physical locations when it comes to everything, including education, we are now having this conversation, even though many of the folks who are engaged in this conversation right now, and all of us have taken the vaccine and could, I could be sitting next to you in Philly and having this conversation. But most of our educational institutions, most of our physical schools don't have the infrastructure for the types of, and I laugh every time I hear people talk about hybrid models and hybrid flex models and K-12 and higher ed, particularly HBCUs. They say, we're going to have a hybrid flex model. And I'm thinking, okay, in the year and a half that we weren't on campus, did you somehow restructure all the technology in all the buildings? Because I know we didn't have that capacity before we left. And I'd be very happy to walk into a room where we can't do it now. That world is gone. Set aside COVID for a second, just for a split second, and imagine in the fall when students who do thrive in remote learning, because it gives them a flexibility and perhaps their living arrangements, their families, it makes them more flexible. People can go to work or move things around. After a month or two of being back in physical class, decide I prefer to be the other way. There's going to be a crisis that hits. I expect it to happen at Howard. I expect it to happen at a lot of schools where people say, between the commute and the stress of moving back and forth, and then the worry about a Delta or a Lambda variant or an American spurred variant. I've heard the scientists talking about that as a possibility. I think I'm just going to stay in my dorm room, or better yet, because something is wrong with the dorms, I think I'm just going to go back home, eat my cereal, and 5 minutes to class, turn on my computer. We haven't even anticipated what's going to happen. Thanks. So I think this is where we learn the lesson now. If we can, we get what we begun referring to as the momentum of memory. Every time we've reached an event horizon that has accelerated trends, what have we done in order not only to continue to survive, but to resist? And I think that's what today's lesson, we can learn from the past, and I hope we get into that conversation shortly.
Oh, we're about to jump right into that conversation right now. Partially because I think that talking about the past, as we know, Sankofa always lays the groundwork for the future.
Always.
So I know we really wanted to lift up our brother Bob Moses today in our conversation.
Yes.
So I think there are folks out there watching who don't know who Bob Moses is.
No question.
So I would love if you can give us an intro of my guy, Bob Moses.
We should do that. Yeah. Bob Moses, our brother, our elder, our new ancestor, whose journey began whose initiation into ancestorhood began over the last weekend. One of the things I think I love about Bob Moses, I'll say loved because his contribution echoes, is that one of the reasons we don't know Bob Moses, the name Bob Moses, more is because of the choices Bob Moses made in his life. Bob Moses did not believe in celebrity leadership. And that's not to say that individual human beings don't make outsized contributions to the forward flow of our collective human journey. And Bob Moses was one of those people. But Bob Moses was not about that celebrity life.
Yep.
And we, of course, in Philadelphia knew and know him well. Even with Philadelphia Freedom Schools. And yes, shout out to our Freedom School people. We're in year 21. We're winding towards symposium. I even pulled out the old 1999. It's the original
You got the
joint, the hand-drawn joint. Yeah, no question. From 99, back in the day, we're in year 21. And we are in many ways the grandchildren of Bob Moses. Because it was Bob Moses and his comrade, the great Charlie Cobb.
Yep.
In December 1963, Charlie Cobb wrote a memo. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee said, let's do these freedom schools. And they met the following year in New York, planned out the curriculum. And coming through the Children's Defense Fund, when we did in 1999 for the first few years, and then Philadelphia Freedom Schools even exceeded the boundaries of the Children's Defense Fund when we said, this is our chance to engage in that liberatory education. And 2 times we got a chance to directly engage with Bob Moses in terms of Philadelphia Freedom Schools, the first being 2002, when we read his book. He and Charlie Cobb wrote a book called Radical Equations, which talks about the history of that student-led movement in 1964 and beyond, the SNCC movement in Mississippi in particular. And then the rest of the book is devoted to the Algebra Project. And I'll run through his bio in just a second to link those things through. And we reached out to him and said, Brother Moses, will you come and have conversation with our young people? We've got several hundred high school students and college students reading this book, and we, every year we pick a book. If the author is alive, we want him to come. And he sent message back. He said, I would love to, but I'm in class. Bob Moses was teaching algebra in Jackson, Mississippi, high school algebra, because he said, this is the gateway to the new Jim Crow in education is algebra. It isn't just reading, writing English. It's going to be the access to the STEM fields, and algebra is going to be the gatekeeper where they cut our people off at the knees, and I'm about to stop it. That's why he started the Algebra Project in 1982. But he sent his comrade, who they had faced death together and faced that struggle together, the great Louisianian Dave Dennis. And Dave Dennis came and spent time with us that summer, walking through Radical Equations. And then Bob Moses and his wife Janet, several years later, did come. We were at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. And that same year, Randall Robinson came again. He's been several times. And they spent the day with us and part of the night. And every time I saw Bob Moses, including the last time I saw him, which was in the summer of 2019, just before COVID hit, the SNCC veterans, and they are all a very close band, as we know. They came to DC to plan the 60th anniversary conference that they were going to have in person. Now it's going to be virtual coming up this fall. And Bob Moses was who I saw him, who he was every time I saw him. Thoughtful, quiet, maybe the last one to speak if he spoke at all. You ask him a question, he would sit back, look up. Very, very, very calm. And in fact, there's a number of good books. One more recent book called Robert Paris Moses, which is a biography of him. There's a quote from him, and it says, "Who is telling the story that defines the historic truth and accuracy of the story?" This is what Bob Moses says. He says, so there's a character called Bob Moses in many of the history books that discuss Mississippi's civil rights movement in the 1960s. I read about him. I sympathize with him. Sometimes he seems like me. And then sometimes I am confused by him and want to understand him better. That's Bob Moses talking about. But the point he's making is, when we hear about Moses, just like we hear about a lot of the SNCC veterans, 2 things. Number one, they were young people, like our young people in freedom schools, like our young people around, like the young people in this movement. Number 2, when we make them somehow superhuman and dehumanize them, we rob them of their capacity to speak to our possibilities as human beings with all our flaws, and Bob Moses left. He left SNCC and in 1965. He said, because I'm getting to be too much the story. We don't need a leader-centered thing. In fact, one of the reasons he came to SNCC, he's from New York, born and raised in New York. His father worked at the 369th Armory. And we know the 369th was the Harlem Hellfighters. So, he was born and raised in Harlem, went to Stuyvesant High School, took a test, got into Stuyvesant, one of the top schools, studied philosophy, studied mathematics when he went to undergraduate school, Hamilton College, upstate New York, in New York. And in Harlem, he encountered Wyatt T. Walker, Bayard Rustin, and he got fascinated with the student movement that was taking place, just beginning to take place in the South. So he asked Bayard Rustin to introduce me to Ella Baker. And it was Bayard Rustin that sent Bob Moses south to meet Ella Baker. And it was Ella Baker who sent Bob Moses to Mississippi, where he hooked up with this local brother named Amzie Moore, who would call himself a race man. And that opened up his world. Because what Bob Moses understood from that moment was, in the words of Ella Baker, the job of an organizer is to put themselves out of a job. Yep. We're not here to tell you what you want. We're here to listen and then figure out how together we can get it. And from that journey, which eventually, of course, led to them, him being one of the founders of the Council of Federated Organizations in Mississippi. They just unveiled a mural near the campus of Jackson State University at the COFO headquarters with Miss Hamer and Charlie, not Charlie Cobb, Bob Moses and others. 1964, Freedom Summer, 65. Bob Moses steps back and says, and then I'll wind it to a close with this. He says, I think I'm getting to be too much of the story. Oh, by the way, Bob Moses was 25 years old when he went to Mississippi the first time. He was 26 years old the next year when he came back in 1961 and set up shop when they said voter registration will be what we use to begin to dismantle this system, not only in Mississippi, but in the South and in the country. He was a little older, in other words, than Charlie Cobb, who was 19, 20 years old when he left Howard University and came south the first time and met his dear friend, who would become his dear friend, Bob Moses. So he was already beyond draft age. That's why I'm mentioning it. Bob Moses then decides, I'm going to Africa. He and his wife Janet went to Africa. 3 of their 4 children born in Africa, in Tanzania. Why? Because the U.S. military drafts him anyway, even though he's beyond draft age. He said, I'm not going to fight in this war. They leave. While he's over there, they start teaching. He eventually ends up in Tanzania in the government helping design the educational system. But by the time he comes back in the mid 70s, because Jimmy Carter is president of the United States and declares blanket amnesty. Anybody who left the country because of the Vietnam War, whatever, amnesty. This is important of electoral politics. Because imagine Ronald Wilson Reagan, the gladiator invader doing that. But I'm sorry, I shouldn't be cussing. I said his full name, so I apologize to anyone out there offended, because I'm deeply offended that it came out of my mouth. But at any rate, what you see is that Moses comes back, and within the decade, by the early 80s, he has started the Algebra Project because his daughter Maisha is in class. They're in Massachusetts. He's going back to get a PhD in the philosophy of math because he's a Bob Moses is a natural teacher and an intellectual. So he's in it. He says, my child has already done all this work in this class. Can I just teach her algebra over here in the corner? What ends up being Bob Moses going to the school saying, can I teach my daughter? Ends up being him teaching her and a few others, ends up being the beginning in 1982 of the Algebra Project. Because what Bob Moses says is this is the next barrier they're going to throw up against us. And so from there to the end of his life, between the Algebra Project, the Young People's Project, and these initiatives, Bob Moses understood that you grow a movement as a social movement, and that education will be the battleground, the structural test, one of the structural tests of whether or not America is even possible as a country of equity. And to the day he died, Bob Moses was never one who deluded himself into believing that full American equality was inevitable. When they asked him last summer, and a lot of interviews, they asked him, well, what do you think about what's going on? These young people in the streets, does it remind you of the 60s? He said, yeah. He said, what do you think is going to happen? He said, well, classic Bob Moses. It could go either way. It could go backward or forward. I guess we'll see. Which means it's up to us
to figure it out.
No
Definitely
question.
Up to us to figure it out. And I think that what we can learn from some of the actions of Brother Bob Moses is ridding this idea of like centric leadership, that one person is the leader, the face, the brains of a movement. And a lot of movements go that way. And it's important to see why he decided that it was time for him to leave a situation when it stops becoming about the people and a person or a group of people and their needs and their wants. It's time to exit that situation if you're talking about a full change or a movement for the people.
That's right.
And I think a lot of times too, especially when we're talking about a liberatory education and creating that, all of the movements that have been successful have been through the hands of the young. So you're talking about high school students, college students, those folks who are fearless, who can actually have the time to sacrifice all of that. And you look at who makes decisions about education right now, right? So you talk about public K through 12 education, or even how these universities are formed. It's old white people making decisions for the young. And I mean the young, whether black or white, right? But the decision maker and the power is concentrated to a group of older folks. And the young, which I appreciate, yes, them fighting in the streets, right? They are fighting back. But to really move and transform that power, it has to happen through the hands of the young. And I think that those are some of the things that we can really push and take from Bob Moses's work and Bob Moses's legacy when we're talking about transforming, reforming education as we know it to be. The other thing that I wrestle with all the time, Doc, one of the pivotal things I wrestle with, so he was very much set on folks have to vote. And in order to vote, they have to be literate. So that then in turn made education and made me kind of embedded in the movement, right? We know to get our rights, we have to be able to vote. We know the decision-making power in this country comes from the right to vote and elected officials. So we have to be able to have more power in the voting system in order to get the rights that we need. But to do that, we have to teach people how to read. So it was embedded in the movement. And then I think he had the foresight to see, okay, we have rights to vote now. Where our people aren't educated is the financial system or mathematics and numbers and science. Those are the other levers that we need to pull to continue to fight for equity.
Let me see.
I feel like our current movement, right? Like when we look at what's going on with education or equity or equality in this country, is there a focused point that everybody's organized around? And then something else is embedded in that. I feel like sometimes we just be all over the place when we talk about equality and equity.
No question. No, I agree. I think this is where we lose the momentum of memory. And it's not only about young people. We know that. It's about all of us, which is why I'm always hesitant when we use demographic labels to categorize social movements. So, for example, we're seeing, the Olympics is on now, which is, of course, every 4 years. The Summer Olympics is cosplay nationalism. That's what it is. It's cosplay nationalism. And it always reveals, and I think now about the curriculum framework we designed in Philadelphia, which I still think is the best set of questions in terms of how to frame inquiry when you start talking about not just Africana studies, which is why we designed it, but any form of kind of what people will call social science inquiry. What we see is, remember those 6 categories, the first category of questions is the social structure category. Who are African people to other people? Well, we see in the Olympics, African people are to the nation states whose flags they're wearing, representatives of those nation states. But that's a very different question than the second category of our 6 questions, which is the governance structure question. In many ways, the most important question of the 6. And that question, governance question, asks, who are Africans to each other? Every Summer Olympics, what you see is African people around the world aren't looking at the flags first. They're looking at the people. So we see Naomi Osaka, for example, in the social structure, Japan is like, she represents Japan. She got the red in her braids. We don't give a damn about no Japanese flag. In the government structure, that's our sister. You know what I'm saying? She Haitian and Japanese. She's black. She reps. She does it right. And then she done stood up and said, talk to the hand. I'm withdrawing from the competition. So she loses. And then in the Japanese press, I'm reading the newspaper, some of them are beating her up. You didn't represent Japan. And we leave our sister alone. Our young sister, Simone Biles.
Yeah,
she said, "Nah, I will break my neck if my mind is not right. So I'm going to I'm backing up so we can get the silver. Y'all don't understand. And then I'm going to leave the individual medals on the table." And immediately in the governance structure, Black people around the world said, "Okay, we with you. We're with you. You know what I'm saying? And in the United States, the white nationalists, and I love all you white nationalists. I do really love you, because what you help us understand is that this has never been a country. I'm coming to Bob Moses and how we understand this. Bob Moses understood that.
Yes.
This has never been a country. There's no we.
No.
There's no we, Charlie Kirk. I have nothing in common with you, young man.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thank you for beating up Simone Biles in your mind, because you won't ball up your chicken fist and do it in person. You have to keep that in, you can say it out your mouth to your loving white nationalist adjacent, friends. But my point is that you help us understand that's a social structure conversation. And then when we see our young sister from Costa Rica, Luciano Alvarado, they done told them, y'all can't do no protest. She put it in her routine. Mind you, young Miss Alvarado is the Costa Rican team. You understand? She ain't got no backup. So if you're looking for what 1968 Mexico City, John Carlos and Tommy Smith, if you're looking for that fist, you saw it from Costa Rica. Why? Because she, as an Afro-Latin sister who represents everybody, and I love the quote in the interview, she says, yes, you're one of us. You understand things. She said, that's why I put my fist up, so people understand, yes, you're one of us. You understand things. And I'm saying all that to say this. Those are young people, but they are young people who have studied, who have paid attention. And like Ella Baker said, in her famous speech that Sweet Honey Rock made into a song, we will believe in freedom cannot rest. She said, to me, young people come first. They have the courage where we fail. But Ella Baker, who Bob Moses loved, they all call her Fundi, teacher. It's Kiswahili. The thing they loved about her was she said, I'm not going to tell y'all what to do, but what I am going to do is make available to you all the experiences of your ancestors and all my experiences. So what Bob Moses understood, he talked about this. He said, voting rights is important. And first of all, if you can't read or write, you should still be able to vote. See, this is the thing. The social structure narrative tells us somehow we should earn the right to vote. Think of the contradiction in that phrase. Earn the right to vote. It's either a right or not.
Or it's not.
Can you read? Why are you asking me if I can read? It's either a right or it's not. Well, Bob Moses understood that today that there is no right to vote that you can't, if you can't protect it. That's why William Barber and them are down there in Mississippi, in Texas right now, because the right to vote has never been enshrined in this society. Well, 15th Amendment. No. There's what you can get away with in this settler state. So Bob Moses said the right to vote and any other right has to be protected by activism, collaboration, and service. We've got nothing in this country if we didn't push, and if we didn't push intergenerationally. So this isn't, Simone Biles, thank God, because Black women, Black people. Because I guarantee you, she done spent some time with her grandparents, the ones that raised her. And I'm sure she didn't tell her grandfather, look, you're a Black man, so I know you don't understand, Grandpa. So I'm going to go over here. No, these artificial demographic labels are part of the problem we have. Yes, there are unique experiences for Black women and Black men, Black girls, Black boys, but Black community, intergenerational, collaborative. We have to figure out how to get back to that and get the momentum of memory. So when we start talking about education, and innovation and liberatory education, we know the schools are more segregated now in the United States than they were when Bob Moses and Imsey Moore and Joyce and Dory Ladner and all were struggling in the South. We know they're more segregated now. We know COVID has exposed that for the world to see, what we already knew. And now we know, and this is where I love this. There's a book that Bob Moses participated in writing called Quality Education as a Constitutional Right. He's got a piece in here that's brilliant. This is from 2010. And he talks about the fact that there are no laws. There's no constitution in the United States. There's no laws that can protect anything without struggle. And the education is the contested ground because this society brought African people over here to work. That's it.
We were property.
We were property. And he talks about, in fact, that is the name of his article. Let me see if I can find it right quick. The article is called,
Constitutional Property versus Constitutional People.
Exactly. Constitutional property versus constitutional people. That's exactly right. Y'all go look at that. In fact, I already know we're going to do this in the year-round freedom school. We're going to go through this article line by line and bring Bob Moses' thinking through. Why? And I'll keep this very short. Constitutional property. He starts the article with a brother in England, Somerset's case, 1772. This was an African who was enslaved in 1749 as a little boy, 9-year-old boy. in the United States, well, the colonies. He was taken to England as 20 years later, and then he sued for his freedom. The English court says there is no positive law on the books that says slavery is legal, so you got to let him go. So what Bob Moses then says is, when they started the United States of America, when you look in the Constitution of the United States, and I keep one because I teach over Howard Law Schools, I keep a Constitution around, and Article 4, Section 2, Paragraph 3, he says they put in what he calls, Bob Moses coined this term, Somerset's Clause, meaning what? If you are enslaved in one state and escape to another state where slavery is not legal, you don't have any rights in that state, and you have to be returned to the other state. And he said, I coined the phrase Somerset's Clause. They gave in the 1619 Project, they gave people all this grief and saying it wasn't slavery. You should read Bob Moses. He don't get no argument of whether they knew or not. Just read the Constitution. They put a clause in there to stop you from doing what Somerset did. I'm over in a country where slavery is not legal. Free me. Okay, you're free. Now, why do I bring that up? What Bob Moses traces through in this article is the fact that this country, the United States, has always needed Black people to be under control. Yes. And he said there's a fight that's in the Constitution between the southern states and the places where slavery was legal and the places where it wasn't. They settled on a compromise after the Civil War. Then Black people coming out of Black institutions break through anyway during the Civil Rights Movement. And now here we are in the 21st century, raising the fact that there are no laws in this country that have ever protected Black people that we could relax and say we have the right. And what COVID has exposed is that this country is teetering on the brink of economic collapse and restructuring, political collapse and restructuring. And just like those white nationalists in Reconstruction, the redemption people came in and put us out them Jim Crow laws, all of our very good friends who are in these states passing anti-critical race theory laws when they don't even know what critical race theory is, who are trying to stop people to vote when they're going to run over their own poor white friends as they trying to stop some 3 old black ladies from voting. All of you are so wonderful because you are moving us to the event horizon. This country is about to be renegotiated. This is the perfect time for us now to imagine the education system we want and to make it happen. Because who's going to stop us?
You say this country is about to be renegotiated.
Oh, it's about to be renegotiated. I'm saying when you read this essay, what Moses is saying is it has gone in 4 stages. That first stage was the Somerset's period. The second stage was the fight leading up to the Civil War and Reconstruction. The third stage was that civil rights movement that he participated in. And the fourth stage is the one we're in now, where the globe is being renegotiated.
Yes.
We identify with that young sister from Costa Rica. We all identify with Naomi Osaka. We all identify with Gwen Berry. Gwen Berry is the hammer thrower. Her events are coming up. If she get on the stand, guaranteed there will be no saluting an American flag. And then we all go into war because the Olympic cosplay is a window into how Black people in this country think. And there will be people who will be shocked. They will be shocked to become aware of the fact that we don't give a damn about a flag before our mama. We don't give a damn about our state flag or a federal flag before our nephew or our niece. We don't give a damn. And an education system, now that COVID has exposed, we don't have the resources. We don't have the structure to be able to do what we want to do. We are going to be in the streets, activism. We are going to talk to each other, collaboration, and we are going to be selfless in our sacrifice, service to force you to give us our tax money. There's nothing free. You're going to equip these schools with the technology. You're going to equip our young people with the technology they need. And when it comes to curriculum, you're going to get out our business. That's what you're going to do. That's why we started Freedom School. You're going to get out of our business. You know what I'm saying? Because our business, George Washington, you're not my dad. And you're going to get out of our business.
Definitely not my founding father.
That's my founding father. My founding father's name was Haywood Carr.
And mine was Walter H. Terrell.
Okay, you see what I'm saying? Yes. You're going to get our business. There's no country. There's only the struggle. There's only the struggle. And I'll say one other thing, Shana. If we want a different United States, we're going to have to build it. Because what, again, Bob Moses, again, writing in this article and so many other places, what we have to understand is the country people want to tell us we live in never existed.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't exist with those white men who had us enslaved in Philly and Mount Vernon and Montpelier and all the other places who wrote that Constitution. It didn't exist when Ulysses S. Grant and them didn't make good on the promise that black people would get land, notwithstanding the fact that our First Nation brothers and sisters had the land taken from them initially. It didn't exist when John F. Kennedy wavered and Lyndon Johnson tried to do something. It doesn't exist today. If you want a different country, you're going to have to build it. Don't look in the past. Because guess what? We was never saluting that flag anyway. We just waving it around for you to leave us alone. It's all cosplay. But let's be clear. And them 3 Negroes who actually believe that stuff, you probably paid 2 of them. And the other one just hasn't gotten the right education yet. But the point is that if you want a different country, Bob Moses is telling us with his life and his service and his words, you're going to have to build it.
Yes.
It's not in the documents.
And I think what's like dope to highlight about his sentiment about constitutional property versus constitutional people is you were always property. You were always thought of
always
as, right? So the Constitution was never built for you. And when you're existing in a history and then a life where you always have to beg for something or ask for something or fight for something, it's telling you that this country wasn't built for you. You always have to be asked to give something. Like, yeah,
that's right.
The right to vote is not our right, no. Right? In terms of this country, like it's not. That's why you got to fight for it.
Because if it was a right, you would have to fight for it.
Exactly. That's why every semi-years the Constitution or the bill or the amendment that was put in the law to protect our right to vote, right?
Well, that's interesting you say that.
Because renewed, right? Every so like white people don't have to get their right to vote renewed.
Well, see, and that's interesting because you're right. You're absolutely right. And he ends this article talking about John Roberts. John Roberts, a brilliant white nationalist, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. I have a lot of respect for John Roberts. And again, I'm not being facetious. I respect these guys. I mean, if you want your criminal enterprise to succeed, you need your best minds on it.
That's right.
And so I respect John Roberts. And,
we on the same page with that, Dr. Carr. I say that all the time about like blunt racists and white nationalists. Like,
no question.
You gotta respect them. I
gotta respect them. You know, you ain't got to argue with them. I don't know what y'all arguing with people. I mean, you know, another intergenerational lesson. Adults taught us you don't argue with a fool.
No.
Now it's 2 fools. In fact, that's in the book of Tower Tep. That's in the ancient Egyptian text. He said, when you see a fool and a rational person arguing, you can't tell the difference. It's 2 fools. Yeah. I don't argue with John Roberts. I read John Roberts, and I want to take John Roberts at your word, baby. I want to take you at your word. John Roberts said, the way you stop discrimination and by race is to stop discriminating by race. Then he sits back like he done said something. Bob Moses quotes him and says, do you understand what that means? That means that John Roberts, who knows better, is saying the way that you deal with racial discrimination in America is to ignore American history. In other words, he's telling you, I don't care. And so my thing is, well, now we agree. See, because I don't care either. you made the mistake of thinking that I care what you think. I know you don't care what I think, and believe me, the contempt is mutual. Now, in the words of Marvin Gaye, let's get it on, because we can organize with clarity. Now, what does that mean? That means that there should be no child in this country, in the world, but no child in this country who goes without a basic set of skill development that they get in school. Yep. They should get a basic education. Now, you're so busy worried about how I'm going to interpret the American Revolution that you don't see that you won't even fund an education system to protect your own children for the world that's coming. Because guess who doesn't care about the United States of America? Okay. All those other countries that are training their children to run not only their countries, but the world.
Yes.
So when you in one breath say, you know, we got to do something about this CRT. We don't want people teaching CRT. And then in the next breath say the American schools are X number in the world and we're falling behind. Okay, hillbilly, do you understand how them 2 things is related? You're so busy trying to choke somebody else that you really got your hands around your own throat. Because we looking at you, if we're smart, like, look at them choking themselves. What you can ready to do? We can ready to and raise this money and organize. Stop arguing with them. So the other thing is, and it's important when you mention that voting rights piece, and Moses writes about this in his article. He says the 15th Amendment Is it a 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution establishing a right to vote if you can't vote? So he goes back to Somerset's case again and says, if it's positive law, in other words, if it's written down, remember in England, Somerset's case, the reason they let him go is because they said there's no statute on the books in England that says slavery is legal. Now, if you want to pass one, then we could keep him. But if you don't, habeas corpus, you got to let the guy go. Mm-hmm. Moses is like, you passed an amendment that said the right to vote. And I would go so far as to quote my friend and colleague, sister, brilliant sister, Valethia Watkins, who says, did you need a 19th Amendment? Why? Does the 15th Amendment refer to gender? No. Okay, so why did you need a 19th Amendment if you have a 15th Amendment that says the right to vote is here? You need it because people read the words and then do what they want. So the Voting Rights Act of 1965 isn't an amendment to the Constitution. It is rather pursuant to the 15th Amendment of the United States Constitution. When you read the 15th Amendment, what it will say to you is, and I just read it so everybody knows, because a lot of people don't know, the 15th Amendment only has two sections, Section 1 and Section 2. Section 1 says the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state, on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Well, that's why you needed the 19th Amendment, because it didn't say you couldn't discriminate by gender, or you could have just stopped discriminating by gender, because it did just because it didn't say it didn't mean you had to do it, right? So you white men, again, the villains of the piece in this specific instance. Section 2, the Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. The reason you have to pass a Voting Rights Act of 1965 is because the federal government failed. You would not protect the right to vote that you had extended at that point only really to Black men, when you could have extended it to everybody. Bob Moses' point is, if you're looking for the salvation for America in the past, you're looking in the wrong direction. If you want it to be different, you have to renegotiate the terms, because the thing they wrote down, they don't follow. You understand? So no, I think this is our chance to the main theme that we're talking about today. This is our chance to renegotiate these terms and create a different form of education.
Well, I was going to say that, because even when you're dead on with how we're framing this, because what doesn't exist, what we do need, what we don't have, like there's no laws governing the way children are educated. The fact that children are able to receive still in this country separate but unequal education, and now it's just reinforced and protected by law, is just a shame. It's a shame. And you were dead on when you said that pandemic exposed it all.
All of it.
All of it, because one of the things the pandemic did expose the gap that widened between the have and the have-nots. We talk a lot about in these instances, of course, because I'm Black, and that's what I care about, Black children. But just the gap between rich and poor that was exposed in the pandemic,
right?
And just basic areas of education. Because I could be Black. If my child goes to a private school, they were still getting a quality education all through this pandemic because of the resources and the money and the choices and the privilege that I have access to. Right.
That's right. That's right.
But to be poor and to be Black, and nobody's rooting for me. There isn't anything that puts stipulations on if you are a school in a low income neighborhood, the children should be guaranteed these basic resources. Or if this school 2 miles away has millions of dollars, we should have the equal to that. But if you're poor and you Black, where is your voice? Where is your protection? Where is your rallying? Where is your cavalry? At the end of the day, like they're not coming.
That's right. And we're coming with each other. We all we got, CMB.
But that's what folks need to realize when we talk about transforming and building education and building a liberatory education. We are all we got. So when we're talking about, even thinking about Bob Moses, and when I talk about how he was very focused, and SNCC, right?
Yeah.
The goal was to get folks to be able to vote. But in order to do that, folks had to be able to read. So almost the right to vote is what the practice of giving folks an education. Like that's what happened. Now we have
helping them, get skills. Yeah.
Yes. Now we have the right to vote, right? But I almost feel like what are we rallying around to make sure that our kids are getting a quality education, right? Where are we going into communities and saying, well, What's the end, right? What's the end goal that we're trying to reach to make sure that folks are
That's
getting
the
a quality
question.
education, right?
Well, that's the
So
question.
the right to vote is what forced that. We need people to be able to read. We need people to have skills. So we're going to have to go and do X, Y, and Z. Now, because of we've gotten rights, right? And again, America just has become, I'm not going to say the wild, wild west of rights, but there's so many things that people are realizing that
No,
America
it's a
world,
battlefield. It's a separate state battlefield. Yeah,
it's so many things.
that's right.
But I feel like we have moved from understanding that education is at the center of it all. And if we really don't work together to focus on building a quality liberatory education space for our children, we are going to continue to repeat the same cycle of a battle. Because we're going to have young people who are coming up, unless they get into a space like freedom schools, unless they have elders and mentors like you, they're going to be out of touch with the past.
Well,
They're
even
not
with
going
all
to
of it.
understand the conditions that they're existing or living within.
That's right.
But how do we all work together to understand that that is the need right now? We are all we got.
We are all we got.
Who are poor and who are Black, we need them, right? We need to rally around them and we need to help them, especially for those of us who are Black and have the resources to do so.
That's right.
We can't continue to live our lives of like, oh, I got my piece of my little rights or my piece of the American pie. You know what I'm saying? Let me mosey on.
Right.
But that's what,
well,
capitalism and democracy does, right? It divides.
There you go. That's right. No, that's right. You've said it. Class and race have to be understood, not separately. And that's the difficult thing. You said a lot, Shayna. And first of all, everybody, these are the conversations we have in freedom schools with our 14, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds around a piece that we've all read and puzzled through. And we pick books, we pick articles, we pick thinking work that many people in a social structure would say, oh, these students can't do that. At which point we say more, tell us some more. Well, because they don't have the skills, they haven't had the background. Once we've heard it, we say, thank you. Now we know that you're someone who is not on our side. The old civil rights song, which side are you on? And then we keep doing what we're doing. But first of all, it's that context. But what you said, that really is the center of it. No human being should go without a community that enables her or him to develop their full human potential.
Yeah.
So this isn't about excluding anyone who would be categorized as white or any other group. Again, this demographic label. However, in a race-based capitalism, what some people call racial capitalism, and that's a loaded term with all kind of, in many ways, race is commingled with class, and class and race get mixed up together.
Yes.
So as you said, you can be Black or brown, or you could be, Latinx, you could be African, US, continental African. If you have the resources, you can become part of the quote unquote upper class. But we also understand in a capitalist society like the United States and the global system we're in, a lot of times when people say they're middle class or upper class, they're really talking about perception and attitude. They ain't talking about money. They ain't talking about resources.
Yeah.
They talking about attitude, right? So what when Bob Moses and his comrades are struggling for is not to exclude anyone from building this better society, but they understand fundamentally that this radically oppressive system we're in is built literally on the bodies of people of African descent and our First Nation folk who got the land taken from them, not even taken from them, because the concept of ownership, that's why he talks about this question of constitutional citizenship. Now, when he then says, where he said, where we learned as young people, the meaning of a radically equal constitution. He said, we learned it from the people in Mississippi who practice what he calls the lived constitution. That's why he makes the distinction. The lived constitution means, how do you treat people? If you've got government resources, how do you distribute them so that everybody eats? Because everybody paid taxes. He says that's the lived constitution. Now, if you're telling me they have to take a literacy test to go vote, then we will go and do that. We will prepare them to do that. But what we're not doing is coming down here and teaching them about humanity. They're teaching us, which is why at the center, well, we're going to do that until we can get these laws changed. But at the center of freedom schools in 1964, and in many ways echoes to this day, They would start with a basic set of questions often. They would say, number one, let's look at this system we're in. You tell me the system you live in. And then a baby in Mississippi could tell you about Jim Crow, right? You don't need an elder. You don't need a teenager. So once they would write on a chalkboard, okay, here are the things. Now, this is the system, right? This is how you've experienced it. You're right. Yeah, okay. So let's create some columns on this board. One, what are the things in the system we want to keep? Two, what are the things that we want to get rid of? Three, what are the things that we want to keep but change? People can tell you what they want changed. And then you say, okay, you want your child to learn algebra? I know algebra. I can teach. Let's get together. What do you want? Some freedom schools, they said, we want to learn how to type. Why? Because in our part of Mississippi, if you can type, you can get a job. And some of the girls can get jobs. Okay, you want to learn how to type? Okay, well, you know how to type, right? Okay, you get together. No, but you start by asking the people. First of all, you got to understand the system. That's our first fundamental step. So like you said, we don't have common objectives because we don't understand the system we're in.
And I think that the other piece, when we're saying that we don't necessarily understand the system that we're in, the other piece of it is some of us understand the system that we're in, and we just be straight up lying.
That's the class. Then that's the class piece, because you can negotiate a little space for yourself to operate. So you can go out and tell the rest of these Negroes, just keep on fighting. Nah, Chief.
Lying.
You know what, Shannon? Let me tell you right quick, 30-second story. When I was working for the school district, my direct report, Cassandra Jones. I love that sister to the day I made transition. Brilliant. One of those great Black women educators in the school district of Philadelphia. I promise this is a very short story. We were going to meetings, and I would hear people talk about what the Black and brown children of Philadelphia need. And very quickly, I developed two questions. Number one, do you have children? Yes. Number two, do they go to Philadelphia public schools? Why no? Okay. Can I leave now? Why? Because you're talking about what Lisa Delbert calls other people's children. You won't even put your own children. You get a check from the taxpayers of this city and state, and you out here playing mad scientist with the lives of Black and brown children and poor white children. You're absolutely right, Shayna.
Lying. You just out here lying, bold-faced lying and manipulating situations. And I mean, I'm not making judgment or looking down on anybody, because I can say, like, I participated in education system that perpetuates that, right? I was an educator. I was in that system. So I'm not
oppress children
here like I'm on a high horse.
You weren't trying to oppress children. You're trying to help.
What I would say yes. My intentions on getting into that system is what I was doing, what I wanted to do. What I began to do, and this is me being totally vulnerable and honest, like with y'all, my community, I was oppressing children. And when I was able to reflect on that and understand the system that I was in and the things that I was doing to Black children, I wasn't comfortable with it, which was just not in comfort with my spirit or my soul. I had to get up out of that. Right. But saying that to say, I can understand fully that we participate in systems that continue to keep our Black people in a cycle, in a system. And what lies are we telling ourselves to continue to lie to them? That is what we have to be reflective on as a people. What am I protecting for me? And we all have stuff that, again, living in a capitalist society, that makes you feel like you have to protect. What if I tell the truth here? If I step out here, what am I actually sacrificing? But again, what lies am I telling myself to make me feel like I'm okay with delivering this low quality education, or not fighting with people who I know have the resources to do better for Black children, and I'm not doing that. And I think that those are the fights that some individuals have to take on, have the courage to take on, if we, again, really want to build something new. We can continue to fight laws. We can continue to fight, practices. We can continue to, again, beg America to treat us right. But until we are able to get into the fight and make true demands and hold people accountable directly, we're going to continue on with a struggle.
That's right. Well, Carrie's laying it out. I'm looking at some of the comments now. I can see them. These comments, she's right. I mean, what you just laid out, Shayna, we should be doing all of that. Well, not the begging. We're not begging nobody.
We ain't begging nobody.
You ain't begging nobody. In fact, Bob Moses was with Fannie Hamer and Ella Jo Baker and what's the sister's name? Eleanor Holmes Norton, who's now delegate in Congress from DC, in as we know, in 1964 in New Jersey at Atlantic City, when the Democratic Party tried to get them to accept a compromise, the Mississippi Freedom Democrats. Bob Moses, one of the co-founders of the Freedom Democrats. And they said, no, In the words of Ms. Hamer, we ain't taking just 2 seats in the delegation, this segregated delegation, when all of us is tired. We all here. It's going to be all or nothing. There would be no Kamala Harris. There would be no Barack Obama.
Right.
Had not for Ms. Hamer and Ms. Baker and them, you know what I'm saying? Annie Devine and them who busted up the Democratic Party. So people say, well, why y'all voting? Both parties are the same. Okay, your lips should probably be quiet and you should learn some more. All the strategies are on the table.
That's right.
We're not trying to reform the 2-party system in America. It can't be reformed.
It cannot.
But if you don't go to the polls and put your local, state, and federal officials in to ease that foot and boot up off the neck of your children, of your mom and them, and sometimes it's real complicated. They gave out. I saw Maxine Waters the other day. They in a hearing on the Hill. They gave out COVID money, our tax dollars, which they should have, in Oklahoma to the so-called 5 civilized tribes, and you got the Cherokee who got the money in Oklahoma and deliberately excluded the Cherokee freedmen, who also were part of the treaty in the 19th century. The United States government said, don't give them the vaccine. And Maxine Waters said, what the hell are y'all doing? And the sister came and said, this is what they doing. My point is, I would rather have Maxine Waters raising that question and doing something about it than, oh, both parties are the same. I'm not voting. Okay, so somebody gonna die because you don't have somebody in the room who can force somebody to do something different. Politics is about negotiations around political power, about power. So, but that's not the only strategy. As Bob Moses said, you got to have activism, collaboration, and service outside forcing that.
And for people who saying that they're not going to vote, then what is your activism stance, right? If you're not going to vote, right?
Okay,
if that's the stance you're taking, then what alternative are you doing? Right. And if you're not building any alternative, just sitting here saying that I'm not going to vote is not actively helping Black people. And I think that's what folks need to understand. I have, again, this is more vulnerability, come to the understanding that I don't want to participate in the 2-party system, but I understand the 2 things that need to happen. I need to vote, again, to at least get the lesser of 2 evils that I need to at least try to hear or get what we need as Black people. But at the same time, in the background, I have to be building an alternative for people. You can't just sit, because I can't sit and accept what I don't want or what I don't like either.
Right.
But we have to build an alternative. What people have to stop doing is when they don't see Democrat or they don't see Republican, not voting for folks.
Right.
Listen to people, listen to their platforms, or help people build a different platform or a different option for people to choose.
That's right.
Again, if those things don't happen, we will be stuck here. A liberatory education is just not going to appear. No. Liberatory schools post-pandemic are not just going to appear. You have said it time and time again in this conversation. We want something different. We have to build it.
That's right. And everybody has a role. I mean, I know we're running to a close. I mean, so when you said that, I thought again back about Mississippi and Bob Moses and his comrades. You know, as Charlie Cobb writes in his book, that nonviolent stuff will get you killed. Everybody in Mississippi was not nonviolent. Mm-hmm. So when Bob Moses and them and these young people are going back and forth at night in Mississippi, many of the elders in Mississippi who on the newsreel look like, well, they don't worry about, they're worried about going to the courthouse, the Klan is riding. Them Negroes was strapped. There would have been a whole lot more young SNCC workers killed if the Black Mississippians didn't have their guns. So understand, everybody has a role. So Dr. King, you're nonviolent. I myself am not. So when you're marching and you worried about the Klan shooting you and the police, don't worry, bro. We over here in the bushes with our guns, meaning you can be nonviolent because I'm not nonviolent, but we're community. Same thing with voting. We absolutely understand. If you're not going to vote, fine. But what is your activism? What is our common piece? Because those of us who are trying to put somebody in place, once we get this little piece of grant from our tax dollars, we're going to send it to you. But we're not going to do that if we haven't talked out our objectives. And so, you know, I embrace and respect my friends who say the only way this system is going to be transformed is it has to collapse. So if you withdraw from participating, it will collapse. I agree. My question to them is, are you prepared for that world? Because that looks like something that's very different than us having this conversation on a platform where we can sit in our houses and apartments on computers. And that looks like
collapse. I'm not saying I don't respect that stance either, but there still has to be a systematic way to make it collapse, right? You can't just withdraw from a process and say, well, I just want to see what's going to happen.
Right.
Okay, if we are purposely forcing the system to collapse, What is the plan B then after that? That should also be being built while you are systematically forcing the system to collapse.
I
You
agree.
can't just sit there and then wonder what's going to happen next. It's said time and time again, because your responsibility is still to build.
That's right.
I think that people have to understand,
That's right.
what our purpose is here, right? On this earth,
Right.
to live and to die, right?
Right.
We are a community, we are a people, and understanding that that's what our ancestors were, and that's what they wanted us to be. Like, you're not here built to exist as this individual chasing the American dream.
Well,
Like,
that's
it's the same what we're saying about when we see the Olympics and we're not looking at people's flags.
right.
One of us win, we all win.
That's right.
And that's what we want.
Well, I mean, I should say this. I know we're getting ready to wrap up.
Mm-hmm.
This is something I think that we have to be aware of. We've never been one people. The idea that Black people are a people, the idea that there's something called Black people or African people, it is a function, a creation of the modern world system. So even if we want to think of each other as having common interests, common cultures, even with all our differences, it's going to have to be built. And so we can't make any assumptions. I think you that's what you're saying earlier when we refer to Black folk who will look out for their individual interests or perceived class interests before they look at, because many people who benefited from the sacrifices of social movements have been those who benefited as individuals. That's why diversity and equity, that's cool, but that's helping you, and you. And then the rest of us suffer. And then you turn around and say, get like me. You're standing on my shoulders.
Exactly.
but so no, I think liberatory education, what we've been talking about generally, liberatory education requires a deep study and understanding of the past, the momentum of memory, building communities with shared objectives, and understanding the system we live in, and then beginning to attack those things we don't like, we don't want, systematically. That's what liberates us, and that's what scares the hell out of any system that is built on controlling people. That's why you won't see much support for this, but then again, we don't care, because we know that if we do it, the system will have no choice but to respond, and in many ways collapse.
That's right. So be curious out there, Black people. Be curious. Okay. Why don't they want you to have this? Why don't they want you to learn this? Be curious, Black people, and then start to explore, and then start to teach or go somewhere to seek information. Be curious, and then build a plan. What is your activism? We have to stay active.
That's right.
But Dr. Carr, I will give you the final word while we wrap up.
No, let me just say this, because there's another sister that made transition since we've been together. And that, of course, was the great Gloria Richardson, who lived almost a full century out of Cambridge, Maryland. Gloria Richardson, who went to Howard University at 16 years old, who was raised on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. We've gone freedom school training at the University of Maryland, Eastern Shore, and been within the call of Dorchester County, which is not only the home of Gloria Richardson, but the home of Harriet Tubman as well, and Frederick Douglass. The life of Gloria Richardson, which there are a couple of good books on her. I thought I may have had them over here, but last thing I'll say is she became an ancestor over the last few weeks as well. She shows us the importance of study and the importance of using what you've learned to get out there and get with other human beings and to organize to change the world. I want to thank you, Shana, because this conversation every week is so important. And thanks to the folks from Citizen Ed, thank all the folks from the Center for Black Educator Development, all my Freedom School people, and y'all, those of you who are not part of this movement, please, these points of entry are very important, because the only way we get out of this is together. No individuals beat any institutions. You got to have institutions, and institutions are built by people. So let's get it together. I love you, sis.
Yes, Doc, as always, thank you. And everybody out there watching today, thank you guys for coming. We will be back next Thursday, same time, same place.
Come on now.